People say I never made a single friend on my way to the top, that I was built to hate everyone I raced against. So when someone asked me who I loved the most in this life, I thought they had the wrong man. Then a name came to me before I could even think. Not a champion. Not a rider anyone outside the paddock would recognise. Just a mechanic with grease under his fingernails, standing under my bike while I stood on the podium above him. So what happens to a man who was made to hate everyone, when somebody finally gets past that? 4 world titles, 59 race wins, a record that stood untouched for years after I hung up my leathers. But here is the truth. Nobody puts on the trophy cabinet. To win the way I won, I had to become someone I am not proud of. I had to be selfish, ruthless. I had to look at the man next to me on the grid and find a reason to hate him, because hate was easier to ride with than respect. That was the sport I chose, a sport built for one person to stand at the top and everyone else to be left behind. So here is the question that follows me around, even now, at 61 years old. If my whole career was built on being cold, on shutting people out, then what actually survived all those years? Who got through? 5 people did. 5 people who never once appear next to my name in any record book, but without them there would be no record book at all. The first person I think of never stood on a podium next to me. He was always underneath the bike, not on top of it. His name was Tony Bass. Everyone just called him Slick. He was my chief mechanic through all 4 of my world titles, and if you want to understand who I really was on the inside, you would have learned more from him than from any interview I ever gave. For years I would come into the garage after a bad session and complain about grip. I would say the bike would not hold the corner. That was my excuse, and I believed it every single time. But Slick never believed it. He watched me closely enough to see what I could not see about myself. The real problem was not grip at all. I was braking unstable, pushing myself in too deep and then having to lean the bike harder and open the throttle too early just to survive the corner. By the time I got to the exit, of course there was no grip left. I had used it all up on my own mistake. That was the first time in my career I had to look at an uncomfortable truth. The biggest rival I had was never the man on the bike next to me. It was myself, and Slick was the one man honest enough to keep pointing that out. Off the bike, we were simple. We would go out for a drink and have a chuckle. I still see him as a mate, though these days I have got fat, and I do not think he wants to be seen hanging around with a fat lad like me anymore. That is the man I trusted with the most dangerous version of myself. But trusting the mechanic in the quiet of a garage, just the 2 of us, is one thing. Trusting anyone with that same broken version of me in the middle of a season, in front of an entire Italian team who had put their careers on the line for mine, was something else entirely. 1998 should have been my 3rd world title on paper. Instead, it nearly became the year I walked away from racing altogether. We went to the Nürburgring, and I had 2 terrible races. I finished outside the top 15, which for me felt like finishing last. After the 2nd race, I went back to the garage, and then I disappeared. Nobody saw me for almost a week. It was July, and the first ever World Ducati weekend was happening the following week, and I just vanished. The team thought I was angry about the results. What they did not understand was that I was not angry. I was done. I wanted a reason to quit, and I was hoping someone would hand me one. Davide Tardozzi refused to give me that reason. At Laguna Seca, he looked at me and said it straight. No comfort, no soft words. He told me I could still do this. He said if I did not want to race anymore, then I should just say so we could all stop wasting our time, retire and go home if that is what I wanted. But it was my choice, so I needed to stop complaining about the bike. I remember thinking, nobody had ever spoken to me like that before, and that was exactly what lit something back up inside me. I put my head down after that. I stopped blaming the machine, and I went out to prove everyone wrong, to prove I still had it in me. By the time we got to Sugo at the end of that season, I had turned it all around and won my 3rd world title by a handful of points. But I need to be honest about something. I did not invent that fire at Laguna Seca in 1998. Tardozzi did not put it there. He just found something that was already burning somewhere inside me, and he had the nerve to strike the match. I had been carrying that fire a lot longer than that season, long before I ever sat on a World Championship bike. Before there was ever a rider called Foggy, there was a boy standing on the side of the road, watching his father crash. My dad, George Fogerty, raced the very same roads that would later define my whole career. Back in the 1970s, he rode the Isle of Man TT himself, chasing riders like Billingham through corners with names I would come to know better than the streets of my own hometown. He worked long hours, and most nights he came home after I was already asleep. Racing was not his job. It was the only thing he did purely for the love of it on his own time with whatever money was left over. So when it came to my own career, he was the one who taught me almost everything on the short circuits. He was patient with me there. But the moment I started talking about the TT, something in him changed. He knew that course better than anyone. He knew exactly what it could take from a person because he had lived through it himself, and that knowledge made him careful in a way he never was about anything else. He was never quite ready to say I was ready. I did not wait for him to say it. I pushed, I insisted, I went against the one man whose caution came from actually knowing the danger, not from fear of the unknown. It took me a long time to understand what that really was. It was not him holding me back. It was love wearing a different face, the kind that does not cheer you on but tries to slow you down instead, because it already knows what the road can do. But my father's caution was never something imagined. That same mountain course had already taken people I respected more than almost anyone else I ever raced against. If there was one man built to prove that hate was not the only thing that could push me forward, it was Steve Hislop. People still call it the Senna and Prost of the Isle of Man. 1992, the senior TT. Steve and I traded the lead back and forth for 6 laps around the mountain course, both of us on unfancied machines, both of us refusing to back down. Honda was so worried we would push each other too far that they called us into a room with the team boss and told us to ease off. We walked out of that meeting shrugging at each other. What were we supposed to do? We both wanted to win. In the end, Steve beat me by 4.4 seconds. 4.4 seconds after 6 laps of the most dangerous racetrack in the world. I was trained to hate the man on the bike beside me. That was how I won. But with Steve, that training never quite worked the way it was supposed to. We'd raced against each other on the short circuits for 3 or 4 years before that, and somewhere in those years we became mates. I mean it. We were quite good mates in the late 80s and early 90s. I never told him this while he was alive, but I never respected another rival the way I respected him. Not one. In July of 2003, Steve was flying his own helicopter near the Scottish borders. He had just lost his ride in British Superbikes a few weeks earlier, and he was preparing for a comeback with a new team. The helicopter came down in the moorland. He was 41 years old. I still think about that sometimes, how a man who spent his whole life trusting machines at over 180 miles an hour lost his life in something so much slower, so much closer to the ground. I learned how to keep racing after I lost him. I had no choice. That is what riders do. We bury the grief somewhere and we go again. But there was one person who never let me carry that grief alone in the first place. After Steve, I do not think I could have kept going without one person standing at the edge of every pit lane I ever raced in. Michaela and I have been together since we were kids. She has stood at that wall through every single one of my championships, timing my laps, watching the board, trying not to think too hard about what could go wrong out there. I remember one race weekend, someone asked her what she actually does for me. She laughed and said she feeds me, she looks after me, all the normal things a wife does. But underneath the joke there was something true. If she thought too hard about the danger, she said, she probably would not have been able to stand there at all. Here is something most people never knew, not even inside the paddock for a long time. Davide once said it best. He said the Foggerty family won 4 world championships, but I only won 2 of them. Michaela won the other 2. He was not exaggerating. When I disappeared that week in 1998 when Tardozzi was the one who refused to let me quit, it was Michaela standing behind both of us the whole time. She was the one who helped talk me back into finishing that season. Without her in my corner, I do not think Tardozzi's words would have reached me at all. Every other person on this list changed the way I raced. Slick changed how I saw my own mistakes. Tardozzi gave me a reason to keep going. My dad taught me what real caution looks like. Steve taught me who was actually worth respecting. Michaela never needed me to win anything at all. She just needed me to come home. People still say I never made a single friend on my way to the top. Maybe that is true, if you were only counting the men I raced against. But 5 people carried me through all of it. A mechanic who taught me to look at myself honestly. A team boss who refused to let me quit. A father whose caution I mistook for doubt. A rival who became the one man I respected without question. And a wife who never once needed me to win. None of them are written next to my name in any record book. You will not find them in the results, the lap times, or the trophies. But take away any one of those 5 people and there is no Carl Fogarty standing here at all.